they wanted to tell me a little bit about myself, and if Steve's the heretic, I'm sort of beyond that, because until I met Steve, every researcher I ever talked to said I was full of dog doo-doo for saying it's really about the fat. And in, I think, 2010, we finally met through a friend who said, hey, you need to get in touch with this guy because he's actually talking about what you're doing. And Steve not only validated that what I was doing, and I was explaining to him how saturated fat seemed to work better and we need a lot more salt. He said it was real, and that started a really great loose collaboration where you have a top-notch research scientist, MD, and an empiricist who gets it done in the real world. So Steve and Jeff have been instrumental in sort of helping me make my program a little bit better and get the results more consistently. And so here we go. We're going to talk about what the real world is and also a little bit on the science. So winning on fat. So I'd like to start the talk with the philosophical question that you've all heard it. If a tree falls in the forest and nobody's there to hear it fall, does it make any noise? Well, there's been a lot of trees falling over the last, I'd say, 7 years, and they've been making noise, but nobody's listening, okay? So just this last year, this is Gina Crawford. I think we got some Kiwis in the room. That's her winning Ironman 70.3 Bataan. 2 months later, she won Ironman 70.3 Taiwan. This is Amanda Stevens, and Amanda Stevens is sort of like at the upper end of her career. She was an Olympic triathlete, and this last year she got fat adapted, and Phil Maffetone and I worked with her, and she got a third at Ironman Brazil, a second at Ironman Coeur d'Alene, and here she is finishing Ironman Arizona in a second place and a new PR for her. So here's somebody who's a career professional triathlete actually getting better. And Amanda actually lost her gallbladder because of all the carbohydrates she was putting through her. So we worked with her, I worked with her to get some bile salts and so she could emulsify the fat and really take it in, and it really has changed her. Zach Bitter, Zach's the current American 100-mile record holder. He just recently rebroke it. And like for the 100 miles, the American record for 100 miles stood for 23 years, and then a couple of years ago, a guy named John Olson broke it, went under, first got Americans to go under 12 hours. And John was one of my athletes, and Zach broke it 5 weeks later, and then again this year. And the interesting thing is, for these kind of ultra endurance events, normally what happens is these guys will go out hard, and then the last 10 miles they'll just fall off a cliff and hang on, whereas both the first time Zach did it and when John did it, they were like machines. John ran his first splits in 5:58, and his second 50-mile split was in 6 hours. And Zach, when he broke it the first time, because he kind of stayed more in the fat burning zone, he was doing this on a track, and there was 414 laps, I believe. And okay, and here's the kicker, though. Out of those 414 laps, except for the 3 laps that he took a potty break, his lap splits didn't vary by more than 14 seconds between the fastest and slowest. Now this time, he still broke his record, but he was shooting for the world record. And what happened was he went out too hard, and he started feeding carbohydrates too early. Okay, he didn't let that fat-adapted switch go on. This is Romain Bardet. So we're seeing fat-adapted athletes actually win in pro cycling. Steve has a long affiliation with pro cycling and a love of it. So we're seeing, this is Romain Bardet. This is him winning the stage 18 of the Tour de France. He was the 9th overall, third in the King of the Mountain series, and he won the most combative jersey that last year. And he just finished second at the Tour of Oman. And this is for the real people, okay? So not just the elitists. This is Diane Credenda. Diane, would you stand up? You're in the room. This is her in 2014, winning her age group at Ironman St. George on a hot day. And I want you to look at Diane's body composition compared to this woman, and you can see what the high carbohydrate diet does. You're seeing a little de novo lipogenesis there. Muscles aren't as good, whereas Diane is fit. And I don't have to, I'm preaching to the choir here, but just take a look at it. And then here's a couple of cancer survivors. The one in the front is my friend John Mahoney. The one in the back has some notoriety, and they're pretty famous guy, but they're doing the Ride for the Roses. It's a Livestrong fundraiser. It's a 100-mile bike ride, and that's John doing a 100-mile bike ride with a bunch of elite fast guys, 20 some odd miles an hour, 4 hours and 23 minutes. He started in a fasted state, 2 Vespas, salt and water, so a total of 36 calories to ride over 100 miles, okay? And that's when you really can tap into fat as fuel at a high rate. And John, he had a pretty aggressive glioma, 2% survival rate, and he's managed to keep it in remission, and he believes that the ketogenic diet is fundamental. Plus, but that's when you combine the exercise, it's powerful. Next, so he's not just a survivor, he's a thriver. He's actually in much better physical shape than he was before, and he holds down a job as a chief technology officer for a company called New Edge, which is owned by Societe Generale. And they handle all the clearing for Societe Generale's clients. So pretty big high-powered job in Chicago. And he actually was going to be here today, but they've had some systems issues, and he had to bag. So real-world guys. And here is Dan Lentz, another faster study guy. And I put in Dan's photo here, and this is at last year's Umstead 100-mile race, which is a foot race and a very competitive, fast race. And Dan is a tall guy like me, so he's not a little guy. He's a big guy. And he ran to second place in 15 hours and 13 minutes. And I coached him personally, and he's got a pretty good story because he's a medically retired Special Forces guy, the tip of the spear in Special Forces. He was medically retired. He'll tell you he was drinking a bunch of alcohol and he was taking enough meds to kill a small village. And the combination of getting on a fat-adapted diet with the exercise changed his life to where he's off it. So he's running to second. Here's the kicker. Less than 600 calorie in-race intake. And post-exercise, because of the ketone and glucose surge, he wasn't hungry. So he went home, took a shower, went to bed, didn't eat till the next morning. So we're out there on the ragged edge. So that's the kind of the limits we're starting to explore. Like yesterday, I ran 15 miles. My meal before that was 4 p.m. on Thursday. And I had nothing but 2 Vespas and a cup of coffee before I did that 15-mile run. And I had dinner with Paul and Diane about 8 o'clock last night. So it just, when you can tap in, it's pretty amazing. Okay, so before the faster study, this was all anecdotal, and that's why, everybody said this didn't exist, right? It's like I said, if the tree falls in the forest, did it exist? So all these athletes, we were seeing all these athletes from about 2007, 8 through now doing things at incredible levels, but it really wasn't existing because there wasn't science. So the faster study being published changed all that. And does anybody know really one of the biggest things about faster? Well, in my opinion, one of the biggest things isn't just the data it has, but the fact that it got published. And it got published in a very high-tier journal because the academic peer review process is a real strict vetting thing. And because of the data that was contained in FASTER challenged what the current body of science says, it had to be impeccable science. And anybody that knows Steve knows he's impeccable. So we're going to go with that. So we're just going to run through the FASTER study. They had 2 cohorts, and I was instrumental in helping get these because Steve and Jeff became fascinated by the ultra runners I was working with. And you can see the conventional diet, low carb diet, and we're going to segue real quickly here to how much fat humans can burn. And this is what the body of science up until FASTER said was possible. So the upward limit was 1 gram a minute, with most people being in that half 0.4 to 0.6, so say roughly a half a gram a minute. And that's why you always heard that exercise or fat was not a viable energy source for competitive sports. Okay? This is the faster data, and this is the high carb group, and as you can see, they fit very nicely in with the body of science. And here is the low carb group, and all the low carb people are all burning well over 1 gram a minute. So complete paradigm shift. The crossover, people are familiar with George Brooks' crossover concept, where your body crosses over from burning fat to burning carbohydrates in sports, and that's where training has a tremendous effect on fat adaptation, and it can shift that crossover more and more to the right. But this has been sort of the science about where we lie in terms of our ability to burn fat. So at about 65% in a well-conditioned athlete, as the current science says it can do, this is faster. So again, your high-carb diet cohort fits right nicely in with the current science, but when you look at the low-carb, they're not only shifting that intensity level into that 70-80% of VO2 max, which is the sweet spot for competitive sports, they're also, because they're burning so much more fat, it's a game changer. And just another slide about submaximal exercise, and this has an impact for a lot of people who want to just get fit. That if you can get your body to want to burn fat as fuel, you can burn the fat. So for a lot of people who are clinicians who are trying to get people to lose weight and they want to exercise, getting that physiological shift in place and then starting an exercise regimen can be very powerful. Okay, and so what are they doing? They're doing a program I developed with my work with Vespa called OFM for optimizing fat metabolism. And FASTER was really about demonstrating that fat-adapted metabolic state. So what I'm going to offer to the audience here is we're really, with Steve and Jeff's work, we're really at the start of a huge revolution and a huge body of science that's going to be developed in the next few years. So now we're going to go back here. So a lot of people are going to say, not the people in this room, but a lot of the sports people are going to say, well, that's all well and good for endurance athletes. And how does that apply to people who are doing higher intensity stuff like like team sports and strength and conditioning and things that require sharp bursts? So we're going to move fast forward here and show a couple other athletes. This is Alexei Yagudin. Does anybody know who he is? He was a figure skater in 2002. He won the Salt Lake City Games with perfect scores. But not only that, but he won every competition he entered that year. And he was under our program then. And the reason why he could do that was because he could train harder and longer. Because one of the key things about fat adaptation for other sports, especially the ones that require fine motor skills, is when you're fat adapted, you become blood sugar stable, which means that the first things that are going to go is those fine motor skills required for coordination and sharp thinking, even before an athlete senses fatigue, okay? So, and that's why, because with figure skating, a coach will watch their athlete, and as soon as they start to get sloppy, they're going to pull them off the ice because they're either going to do the move incorrectly or they're going to fall and hurt themselves. And Alexei, because he was using this approach, was able to train longer, harder, just get those moves down really well to where when he performed, he was just in that zone and on it. This is Sammy Atcherberg. She's a modern pentathlete in Colorado, she's on the modern pentathlete team going to the Olympics. And that's her winning the Pan Am Games last year. And she just won a competition, correct, Dan? Yeah, another one. And she made that switch to being a fat-adapted athlete. So it's kind of a murky picture, but I want to share one other little story that I can't say too much about. But I have an Olympic swimmer who I've worked with, and she's a gold medalist. And she got on the fat-adapted thing, and then they came to me because she wasn't getting the performance. So I said, okay, well, you're fat adapted. We're going to try to be very strategic with the carbs. And this is just a little And so if you look at Olympic swimming, the event is just bam, high intensity, just that's the event. But if you look at the training, it's an incredibly large volume of training. So we got her fat adapted, we got her to bring back the carbs, and I just as an aside, this is kind of interesting because I just spoke with one of her coaches the other day, and he said, yeah, her swim coach pulled her aside a couple of weeks ago and said, is there anything you need to tell me about what you're doing? Because you're killing your workouts and you're looking really lean, and I just need to know we're okay. And she said, so that's the kind of, so for the people who are going to say that fat adaptation is going to work for this, it's going to work, and you don't have to have 2.3 times the fat burn like an ultra endurance athlete does, but for these other things, I think the way to bridge this with a wider audience is that if people are going to get a 20, 40% increase in their fat adaptation, that's a huge incremental shift that's going to be a game changer for athletic performance. So the reason I've got this up here is because there's kind of a murky picture emerging here, and hopefully I can explain it. So one of the things that makes this a little hard to sell to people is because what you notice is what you don't notice, okay? Because when you're tapped into fat, you don't have the ups and downs in energy levels. You just feel good, because when you take a gel, when your blood sugar's low, boy, you feel great. You just feel steady strong. No more mental fog, no bonkings and cravings, your mental focus and motor skills stay sharp. And this is the other thing. I don't know if any of you have had this, but it's just a lower perceived effort. So you don't think you're doing much until you look at your pace or your power meter or any of your data. And then the recovery, okay? And so it's what you notice and what you don't notice, and you have to clue people in about that. So it's easy. And this is where we think you're not being held hostage by carb cravings and hunger. And this is a key point. There's significantly, what we're seeing in this emerging picture is for this audience to know, is there significantly more flexibility in the carbohydrate tolerance if the athlete is not compromised. So a lot of young athletes who haven't been compromised and wind up with insulin resistance or metabolic syndrome, if they don't have any of that, the window of flexibility goes way up. And on race day, if you're not wrecked, I just tell people to use what they want and like, and don't worry about it. We want to make lifestyle driven, not metrics driven. And I'm not saying that the metrics and the tools out there aren't useful, but they need to be seen as tools to help validate a lifestyle so you get in that zone. And then it's sustainable over the long term. Anybody who's doing this will tell you how easy it is, because once you're fat adapted with that window, with the exercise and the window of carbohydrate tolerance that it opens up, that you have that variability, whereas if you're sedentary and having to be on a ketogenic diet, it's very strict. So I think the combination of exercise and diet really is a powerful tool for making this a much more sustainable and much more marketable program to a wider audience. And this is one of the reasons why, because one of the things I'm starting to see in this is the fact that the stress response, the conscious thinking response that goes on, especially with a lot of the type A athletes, I spend a lot of time just talking them away from the edge to learn to relax, because that has as big an impact as the carbohydrates. And I'm kind of going out there to say that, but it's real, and it's hard to put a metric on and study, but it's there. I'd also like to reframe recovery, because recovery is a big topic in sport athletic performance. And so it needs to be reframed, because like in everything that has to do with fat adaptation, it's a completely different paradigm. And what I'm trying to reframe it is, the reason people say they recover faster, it has nothing to do with the fact that they recover faster. It has to do with they've done less damage. And when you point that out to them, it's like, oh my God, that makes a lot of sense, because there's less oxidative stress, less lactate load, better hormonal balance. There's even endogenous glycogen synthesis, an improved hormetic response, because when you're recovering, when you haven't done the damage, your recovery actually can make you stronger. Your body can focus on making you stronger rather than just getting back to normal. I think, Diane, you probably noticed that after Ironman of St. George. Okay, so a couple things we're seeing because we're so far out there. Athletes that go on this program the tendency is to have very high cholesterol numbers, total cholesterol numbers. They have excellent ratios, improved HDLs, high and variable LDL counts, very low pattern B, and then low triglycerides. We see typically less than 80 for endurance athletes and typically less than 200 for strength and conditioning sports. And what the message here is there's a whole new paradigm emerging here, so it needs to be studied. So blood sugar and ketones. With athletes, we're seeing lower, faster, and post-exercise serum ketone levels than what the current body of ketogenic diet research suggests. Yet these athletes are well adapted. They're showing ketone levels, but it's very low. Maybe Steve can explain some of that, but but these guys are obviously well fat adapted by the metrics we're seeing. Many of them end up with higher fasting glucose. So don't worry about that. Surprisingly high post-exercise glucose surges. We're seeing some people do fasted rides, they'll hammer it towards the end, and they'll see a post-exercise glucose surge of 150 to 200, which is pretty significant, but as corroborated by FASTER, that's a transient glucose surge, and that glucose gets shunted into the muscles as glycogen. So I wanted to put this picture up because this is Jenny Capel, an athlete that I adapted, years ago, 6-7 years ago. And so what's emerging here is a completely new metabolic picture of health that's not even out there in the medical and sports physiology science yet, that needs to be developed, and it really calls for the science to follow up and figure out what's going on. So why is this not taking off? Well, there's a lot of psychology. So I don't have to tell this crowd here, but for this crowd to know where the rest of the crowd is, this kind of is where we are right now. So this is some of the things that have kind of propagated that being fooled, okay? Low-carb diets are exactly what you need. Should not if you're active. Carbs are the fuel to drive your life. Suddenly everyone's forgotten this. Working out 5 days a week, this is what they did. This is Chris Carmichael, famous Carmichael Training Systems, okay? This is Louise Burke, one of the world's most renowned sports nutritionists. Right, Rod? Right, Peter? Okay? The last sentence of this article that came out in 2006, however, those at the coalface of sports nutrition can delete fat loading and high-fat diets from the list of genuine ergonomic aids for conventional endurance and ultra-endurance sports. And that's what's been embedded in the sports physiology for all these years. Now it's changing, and Louise kind of coincidentally published a huge editorial 1 week after the publication of FASTER. I just kind of strikes me odd that she could write a paper that large within a week, kind of changing her tune. But this is what's been out there, and this is where people are, the other people not in this room. And why is that? Because science is a security blanket. I just remembered until I met Steve, everybody said, where's the science? And even after I met Steve, there's no science. There's no science. So most of the people out there want that security blanket of scientists, experts saying, oh, this is good. And we're that 20% of people that are saying this, okay? But we're not going to get them to lose that blanket. What we got to do is create a new security blanket. And this is where I'd like to end it up, is we need, I'm going to continue, as Steve said, whatever you're doing, just keep doing it. Because now people are noticing, because now there's some science. But we need to have the science, because this picture of athleticism combined with fat adaptation is what we're seeing is extremely powerful. But as any good scientist will tell you, this is a very complex picture that needs to be parsed out with controlled studies and looking at a lot of variables. So I think it's going to open up a whole new field of research. I think Steve and Jeff are keen to do that, along with Dominic D'Agostino and several others. So I'm going to end it up with, I think a lot of more trees are going to fall, but thanks to everybody in this room, I think people are going to start to listen. They're going to be forced to. Thank you.